welcome back to Backlot Pass, and today's guest is the wonderful Michele Greene. Michele, it's an exciting time for you. You recently
Yeah.
sold, a three-book series to Storm
Yep.
Publishing in the UK. My name is
Yeah.
Emily Ray, suspense thriller, like super cool stuff. So I'm curious. We were talking a little bit about it. Before we kind of got into it. But what's the writing process been like for you working on this series?
Well, it's great. I love my editor. Her name is Claire Board. Um, I'm really happy with Storm. And I just started. We did the deal like just a couple of months ago. Um, it's very exciting. I mean, I've been an actress for so many years, right? And I always was writing. I was always writing. I was always writing like stories and short stories, and I was writing scripts and short screenplays and all these things. And then I don't know, it was back in like 20 years ago, I kind of decided maybe I wanted to write a novel. And I wrote a young adult novel, which I sold. And I sold it to HarperCollins, which is a big publisher, which was really exciting. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Wait. Oh my heavens. And then I sold another YA book a couple of years later, called Keep Sweet to Simon and Schuster. Um, and then I was, as we, before we started the recording of this, we were talking about this whole process of being in development for TV and film, which can be so frustrating. And I've had both those books. One is in development again right now. The original one that I wrote many years ago is being re-released this summer by an indie niche publisher that only does YA. That's called Banrian Books. And that book came out like right on the cusp of social media becoming like this huge force in the lives of teenagers. So like literally between the hardcover and the paperback, it was like a different world. And I'd always wanted to update the book. I'd always wanted to say, no, I want to update it. I want to update it because it was just right on the edge. And now it's been optioned for development. So since it's moving forward in that process, I think, well, maybe now we should do the update and get that book released. But the Emily Ray book is it's a suspense thriller. It has a female protagonist who's an FBI agent, and she's the for the Western United States, she's the head of the CARD team, which is the Child Abduction Rapid Deployment um, team, and they handle all the Western states. And it's when you see, when a child is kidnapped, when a child goes missing. Um, they don't call card for every single case, but they call them for certain cases, right? Because some kids go missing and people don't even realize right away that they're missing or whatnot. But there's some cases that are higher profile, or they are more urgency, and they know right away that the child has been taken by someone. And then the card team will like mobilize, and they have all these specialists in every area, data analysts and profile people from the BAU, and all kinds of people come together to try and find that child. So the Emily Ray book is about this woman who's the head of that team in the Western United States, and she herself was a kidnapping victim. She was kidnapped as a child, and so she has brings a different perspective to it than some of the other team members, because most of them, are federal law enforcement agents, but they've never been through that. So and then she's got a whole bunch of, kind of an interesting backstory and a couple of big reveals of big secrets we don't know until, halfway into the book and whatnot. But it's fun. It's great. I mean, it's a great process. I absolutely love writing. I love writing as much as I love being an actress. It's totally different discipline. You have to completely solitary. It's just you and your computer, and you can't really be like an actor by yourself in your office. I mean, you have to be with other people. You have to do it with other people. Um, and that's like a very external kind of, thing, art form, way of storytelling, getting up and pretending to be people. And this, of course, is a very internal one, but I really enjoy it. And I'm thrilled that, that we sold the book. And I wrote it as a standalone book, and they wanted it as a series. So
Wow, that's awesome. That is
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
What's your favorite part just about writing and that form of storytelling in general?
Well, I think with novels, it's like when you write a screenplay, there's a lot you can do with no dialogue, right? There is a lot you can do with just visuals. Um, there's a lot you can do. That I mean, there's a lot that's done in post-production with music, right? Like I had a great acting teacher once who said if any of us knew how they were going to score a scene of a movie, we would change our performance, right? Because sometimes the score does half the work for you, right? And like I was just watching, I love Korean television, right? I'm like totally in love with Korean television. And I was watching this series like a couple weeks ago, uh, with Lee Sung Kyun and IU, and it's called My Mister. And there's this great scene in it, no dialogue, no dialogue. This girl who's kind of like an outcast, a misfit, and she's working at this company and she's really distant from everybody. And there's this moment when the entire group of people she works with are running, they're all going to catch the train and they're all running together, right? And she's like part of this group. And there's this beautiful scene because there's no dialogue. It's just this group of people running through the train station in Seoul. But in that moment, she's part of the group. You know what I mean? In that moment. So in other art forms, you can show a lot and tell a lot. But in narrative, like a novel, you really get to write it out, which is wonderful. And it's really fun, because you get to write all the subtleties of what characters are thinking, and you get to go into their internal mind and lives and whatnot, and you get to set the scene the way you want to. It's great. And because it's long, you don't have to make it like really short and concise, right? It's going to be 300 pages, right? So you can take your time.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And the thing about books is that you're able to go full in with that detail and everything.
Exactly. It's so great. You don't have to, you really do. And a lot of times the detail, like the genre I'm writing in right now, is very plot driven, right? It's very, very plot driven. But I'm not a super plot driven writer. Like I really like to, because I'm an actress, I really like to delve into what the characters are about. I want every character to be three-dimensional. I want every character to have conflicts. And sometimes in certain book genres, it's all plot. So they're just like the characters are kind of like one or two dimensional, and we just advance the plot. But I also feel like when you set the scene and the tone, um, that's like the connective tissue between you and the reader, right? That's the stuff that makes the stuff that makes the reader start to imagine the words on the page, like in their head. That's where you cement your relationship with the reader, right? That's where they connect with the book and the characters. And I think sometimes people forget that, and you have to have that because that imaginative leap that the reader makes is that's the foundation of your relationship and their relationship to the book.
I'll use the Harry Potter series kind of as an
Oh,
example, with like because there's a reason I would say most people prefer the books to the
oh
movies
yeah. Oh
because
yeah.
you're able to have all that detail in the books, and then there's only so much you can pack into a 2 3 hour film.
Right. Yeah. And the thing is also, this is something that people forget. I mean, I think they forget it when they adapt books to movies. Almost every single movie you see, even when it's good, the book is always better. The
Hmm.
book is always better. And you're too young to remember this. I remember when like MTV was new and I was in college. Um, I remember Bruce Springsteen said, who was already a big star, he said that he didn't really like the idea of videos, music videos, because he wanted each listener to make their own imaginative leap about the song and what the people in the song looked like and who, you know what I mean? And what the scenes of the song were. Because that's a huge part of why you connect with something, as a listener, as a reader, especially. And the books just it, that's what I was meaning. It's like the connective tissue of that whole relationship. And the movie does it for you. You know what I mean? The visual takes that away from you because it's presented for you. So now you know what it looks like. Now you know that Harry Potter looks like Daniel Radcliffe. Okay. Now you know that Hogwarts looks like Hogwarts. You used to imagine the dining hall, right? But now you see it. Okay. And then once you've seen it, it's almost like you can't go back to your version of it,
Mm.
right? Like you imagined Hogwarts a certain way, but once you've seen it on screen, it's like, oh, it's taken that away from you. So I always tell my son when he's reading something that's also a movie, I always say, read it first, read it first, read it first.
Yes, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would imagine it's a little bit jarring if you're watching the movie first,
Oh yeah.
and then go into the
Yeah,
book.
because then when you read the book, you see the images of the movie. And
Mhm.
books
Yeah,
actually, I think books are incredibly visual. You know what I mean? I think that thing that happens when you imagine, like when you read To Kill a Mockingbird for the first time, you imagine those streets in that town, right? You imagine Boo Radley, over by the porch of the house next door. You imagine Scout sitting on that porch with Calpurnia. You know what I mean? You imagine the people walking by, and then you see the movie, and the movie's wonderful. It's a great movie, but it's like stolen that from you, right? It's stolen that from your imagination.
yep. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
So now, let's get into. I want to get into a bit of your background now. Noah. So I read that your mom was a singer in her
Yep.
younger years. She even
Yep.
performed in a trio with her two
Yep.
sisters, right?
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
you've talked before about how your mom would tell stories about performing, being on tour. Then she would also, your mom loved great plays, great literature,
Yeah.
all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Overall, how big of an influence, did your mom have on your
Huge.
interest in the arts?
Huge, 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 huge. I grew up with a single parent. My father passed away when I was an infant. And we didn't really see his family that much when we were young because most of them were in Oklahoma. I was born in Las Vegas, but I only lived there for like, I don't know, a year and a half or something. My dad passed when I was about 4 months old. My mom stayed in Las Vegas for like another year. And then she moved back to LA. And we moved in with my grandmother. And my mother's side of the family are Central American and Mexican Central American. My grandmother's from Mexico. My grandfather was from Nicaragua. And it was totally like Spanish language household. Like nobody spoke, I mean, they spoke English, but they never spoke English at home. They all spoke Spanish together. And my mom had been in a trio with her two sisters. Like there's like a very famous Mexican trio called Trio Los Panchos, and it's three guys, and they were hugely famous. And there were spin-offs of that. A lot of other groups copied that, and it's acoustic guitars, and it's all these boleros and like really traditional, Mexican songs. And my mom, like many, many artists of that time, she and her sisters did that, and they performed a lot. They were a lot, they appeared a lot in the early days of live television. They were regulars on this TV show called Western Varieties that was a live broadcast with Doy Odell from KTLA. And there was this very legendary producer named Klaus Landsberg, who was like a massive pioneer of television and live television. He was like this technical genius and this sort of creative genius. And he put together like these live TV shows. And so it was really groundbreaking at the time. And so my mom and her sisters were on that show every week. And they were they're in these gorgeous custom made, mariachi costumes, everything you can imagine with the guitars. And they were all really pretty and they all sang really well. So she had this whole life in show business, and then when she got married, of course, like women did in those days, they stopped work. She stopped, but I don't think, I think that was the happiest time of her life, probably. You know what I mean? Because she loved that. And she also was really well read. My mom didn't go to college. She didn't, which is sort of weird because her father came from this very, very distinguished family in Nicaragua, right? And he was just kind of, I think he was just kind of lazy. He didn't want to do anything. He's what in like in Mexico you'll call like a junior. And he came from a well-to-do family and he had a lot of money and he didn't really have to do anything and he didn't kind of want to. Um, but looking back, he should have encouraged his daughters to go to college. You know what I mean? All his sisters went to college. They all became doctors. It's like, um, and my mom should have gone to college. My mother should have been a professor. My mother should have been a teacher. She should have any number of things she could have done. My mother was so smart. But she read all these great books. She'd always read them since she was young because her mother was the same way. And her mother came from like this very working class Mexican family, but she was very, very smart. Um, and so my mom read, all these great plays. She used to tell us the story of Wuthering Heights as like bedtime stories. She would tell us the stories of all the different Dickens novels. We would talk about plays. She would always talk about Death of a Salesman. She was always talking about all these things. And so you sort of grow up in an environment where it's part of your life all the time to talk about novels, talk about plays, talk about narrative. Um, so yeah, no, she had a huge influence. Yeah.
There's a great story that they've told of like I'm pretty sure that your mom took you to like I think it was an audition for like Alice in Wonderland or
Oh
something.
yeah. Yeah. I was so nervous I couldn't even
Yeah,
do it. I couldn't do it. I was terrified. I mean, I was a very shy child. My brother was not. My brother was, my brother was like this brilliant kid that by third grade, they were like, my God, he's got like this monster IQ. Oh my God. He was, like the smartest kid in school. And he was very good looking and he was very like charming and very confident. And I was kind of the opposite. I was this skinny, really shy, anxious kid. I was bullied a lot. Back then, we called it you're being picked on. Now you'd say, oh, wow, you're really being badly bullied. But I was a very easy target for like mean girls, because I was extremely shy. I was afraid to speak in class. Um, and I wanted to do a play. Like I wanted to be in like the play you do in like when there's a community theater in like your local park, right? That's what it was. It was Plummer Park in Los Angeles. And they were having auditions to do Alice in Wonderland. And I went and I was so nervous. I was like, I can't do it. I was like, I can't do it. I can't do it. And then my mom said to me, okay, we'll go home. We'll go home. But I just want you to know if we go home and you don't do this, you're never going to do plays. You're never going to do anything like that because you have to get up there and do it. And if you're not going to do it this time, then you're never going to do it. And I just want you to know that. And I remember like our car was in the shop and we had to take a bus. So like the idea of having to turn around and go back on the bus just made you feel like such a loser. Like you'd taken a bus there and then you're gonna have to take a bus back without having done it. So I said like I just can't, I have to do it. I have to do it. And then I got a part and I was so excited I got a part. I couldn't believe it. I was the Queen of Hearts. I'm still friends with the girl who was in that show with me. I
really,
see her on
wow.
Facebook all the time. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, that's no, that's one of those stories that that you'll remember forever, right?
Well, yeah, it's like, there are moments when as a parent, I can understand my mom doing that because as a parent, sometimes you have to pull that card out, and of course, it doesn't mean you're never going to do a play, but you have to know when the moment is that you have to give your kid a push, right? And there's times you have to not give your kid a push. There's times you have to go, their anxiety is too high or they're too, you know what I mean? It's too overwhelming. But I think my mom rightly just sort of saw like, and I think she knew that if that I would feel like such a loser if I had to get on the bus and go back and I hadn't auditioned. So she succeeded. Yeah, she succeeded. Yeah.
Yeah. For high school, of course, you went to Fairfax. You're
Back
one of
City.
Yeah, you're one of many notable people who've
Oh,
gone there.
I know.
Quite a long list of
Oh,
notable alumni.
yes, I know. Lots of people who went into the arts and other things, especially, but the arts went to Fairfax, and some went the same time I did, which was bizarre, right? Just totally bizarre. Like Anthony Kiedis and people always call him Flea, right? That's his band name.
No.
I don't think of him as Flea. I think of him as Michael Balzery because that's how I knew him. He was Michael Balzery, who was that little like kid who played trumpet in the school band, right? And when we would do musicals, you'd always see Michael Balzery with his trumpet in the orchestra pit because he was in the school band and his little curly hair. Um, and now, of course, they're both like these massively cool rock stars, but and I remember when they formed that band, we were like, what's the band called? What? And Anthony was in like drama with us. He was in Guys and Dolls. He was in all these crazy productions. Um, and he was little. He was always like really little. Yeah, yeah. And Hillel, the one who passed away early in the life of the band, he was their best friend. It was Anthony and Michael and Hillel. And no, they were just like these, kids in our school, right? They were like these kids we saw in school every day, and suddenly they became these massive rock stars. And I used to live in the same neighborhood as Anthony, and I would once he was already like a huge, huge rock star. And I would see him in the market sometimes. And I'd be like, hey, he'd go, oh, hey, Michelle, how you doing? I'm fine. How are you? You live around here? Yeah, me too. Yeah. Um, but yeah, no, it was interesting. I mean, it's great. I love that they've had this tremendous success and, they're like, it always makes like my cred go up a little bit when I tell people, oh no, I went to school with the Chili Peppers. Yeah.
What was the drama program at Fairfax like?
It was good. I mean, that was kind of a time when a lot of public high schools, um, in all over LA County, and all maybe Southern California, all over LA County, certainly, they had really, they had money, they had really good teachers, they had really good programs, and we used to go to, we always had great teachers. We had three different drama teachers when I was there. We had one when I was a freshman, and he was, I don't know how people, now you'd like go to jail, but he was like a guy who would always have romances with students.
Oh
He would
boy.
have like relationships with students. And we, of course, knew about it. We were like some girl in our class, right? And then he got in trouble. He got in trouble and they took him out of drama. And then we had like two different teachers, but they were both really good. And we had good programs and we had good choreographers and we always had a really good music program. So the school band, like Michael Balsary on the trumpet, always played for every musical that we did. And they were good. They were like really good. And there were other high schools. We used to go to these drama festivals, right? Which I guess they still have. And you'd go to compete with schools all over LA County. And it would be held at one high school from like first thing in the morning until 6 p.m. at night. And it was just, scenes and monologues and all kinds of stuff all day. And when I was at Fairfax, we were like kind of a good school. We had a good program. And there were other schools that had really strong programs also. North Hollywood had a really good program, I remember, because whenever you go to the festival, you'd be like, okay, we're going to compete with the kids from North Hollywood. Chatsworth had like this incredible program that had Kevin Spacey, Mayor Winningham, Val Kilmer. I mean, they were all students at Chatsworth. And we'd know when we go to these drama festivals, like, okay, Mayor Winningham is going to be competing in this category, or Kevin Spacey. At that time, his name was not Spacey. Was still using his father's name because Spacey was his mother's name. At that time, he went by Kevin Fowler. And we would be like, oh, yeah, Kevin Fowler is going to be competing. And then, he'd always win because he was so good. I mean, the guy was a brilliant actor at 16. He was so good. And then, they'd perform, whoever won would perform. And all these kids would be crowded in these auditoriums, you know, but it was a really exciting, fun time. And when I tell people, no, no, we'd go to drama festivals. And then our group of kids from our class became really friendly with the kids from Chatsworth. So we were all friends, So we were friends with Kevin and Mayor and all those people. We were like drama nerds, you know what I mean? We were like drama nerds. And so we'd hang out in the summers and do stuff. Yeah.
Wow, wow, that is so cool. That is so
Yeah.
cool. Wow.
I had the biggest crush on Kevin Spacey when I was like in 10th grade or something. Yeah. I had this huge crush on him. Huge, massive crush on him. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is right after you graduated from Fairfax, you got a role on a sitcom for
A
CBS.
horrible sitcom. Yes, a horrible sitcom. Horrible sitcom. It was horrible. It was a friend of my brother. So my brother's 4 years older than I am. So a friend who is a couple years older than my brother had been in drama. My brother had been in drama in high school. My brother was in it like as a fun activity. My brother was never going to be an actor, right? He's going to be an academic. He's like a brilliant academic at Stanford. But he enjoyed it. It was like fun for him, right? Um, and he liked all those artsy kids because, they were so like open-minded and, a lot of time my brother's not gay, but a lot of the kids in drama are gay because it's like the one place where like everything's okay. You know what I mean? Nobody's going to judge you. You're not going to be picked on. It's like a safe space, right? So you always had like kids who were sort of odd, were the kids in drama. So a friend of his who was a couple years older than him um, was already working as an actor. And I knew him because he used to come back we would do another one of these festivals we would do is a one act play festival. And he would always come back to Fairfax and do the one act play And so I'd done a couple of those with him, and I knew him. And he introduced me to his agent, who was, an agent. And so she was like, okay, you're not 18 yet, so you're not going to work till you're 18. You got to stop biting your nails. You got to do this. You got to do that. And she sent me on an audition like 3 weeks later, and I got that audition. I got the very first audition I went on. And I had no idea. I mean, I had no idea that it was like a big deal to get callbacks. I like actually showed up late to the first audition. I don't think I even wore any makeup. I think I just showed up. I was wearing a pair of Levi's and a t-shirt. I remember that. And I showed up and I got a callback. And my agent was like, "That's great. You got a callback on your first audition." And I got another callback. Then I got another callback. And so my agent was like, wait a minute. And then I got the job. And then I got in the union. And I was like, well, this is a piece of cake. And then the show ended, luckily. It was horrible. It was absolutely awful. It was like the Facts of Life, but it made the Facts of Life look like King Lear. I mean, it was so awful. Girls in boarding school, Oh, thank heaven it didn't go. And I had already gotten into college and I'd already gotten into this program at USC. So I didn't even realize when I signed that contract, that was like a 5-year contract. If the show had gone, I would have had to drop out of school. And I didn't want to drop out of school at all, because working in TV was not in my plan. I was getting ready to be a freshman in college, right? And then I just sort of kept working and I stayed in school. I stayed in school the whole 4 years and I got my degree at the end of 4 years. So I didn't have to drop out and go back or anything. But I worked the whole time I was in school. I was constantly working. I just got on this loop and I would get these guest shots on TV shows and I would get into TV movies as, teenage girls. And yeah, it was a funny time. It was a funny time.
Yeah, it's interesting because there is one episode from Dorothy
No,
that is on YouTube and I found it and it
no, no.
let's see, so there's a part where you and like the other students are singing and
Oh
stuff.
no, I don't know what it is. No.
And then there's another part and it's very jarring. Dorothy Loudon does like a whole song and dance routine.
I know.
It's
You know what it
very jarring.
was? You know what it was? It was an era, the writers on that show had written on I Love Lucy, right? The director of that pilot and the 4 episodes that we did had been like a sort of golden heyday of TV guy in the 60s. He was kind of an asshole. His name was John Rich. Um, and but he was a big sitcom director. And it was like this cusp of TV had changed, right? TV was changing and it had changed. And they couldn't quite make that leap. Like the idea of building a show around this kind of loud body, Broadway belter kind of woman, which was Dorothy Loudon, right? She was very good on Broadway in musicals. She was absolutely wrong for the small screen. She couldn't adapt to it. She didn't know. And they still had this weird, it was almost like a throwback to like vaudeville, right? That you would like build a show around a person who was going to sing a big number every week. It was so dated. It was dated in 1979, right? It was already dated, but they were kind of stuck in that. And if you watch early TV, like in the I Love Lucy era, of course, they have tons of stuff that's just like vaudeville because it's not that far removed, right? But you start to get into the 60s. Like my son and I love to watch these old TV shows from the 60s, right? We watch, the Andy Griffith Show. We watch, so we've been watching That Girl with Marlo Thomas, which was on when I was in elementary school. And even on that show, they have these weird things where they'll have like 3 episodes with Ethel Merman, right? Like and Ethel Merman singing, and it's very jarring because you're like, what are you doing on the small screen? Like, what the hell are you doing? And so Dorothy Loudon, they just, that was like such a passe idea. And so they had to build like some big song. Every episode had to have her doing a big song. And it was god awful. I mean, she was a good performer, but you need to do that on a great big stage in a different type of show. And oh, it was awful. It was the worst pilot. The only thing I was happy about was that the writers had worked on I Love Lucy, so I could talk to them about Lucy and I would ask them things about Lucy. Um, and I'm so glad that thing didn't go. Can you imagine? Oh my God.
Yeah.
And there's only one episode of it. Good, good, good. That was awful. And then so it finished. I mean, it died a quick death and it was done by, July. And then I think I did Laverne and Shirley. Yeah, I did an episode of Laverne and Shirley with E.G. Daily, who's gone on to be quite a big voice-over
Hmm.
actress. Does the voice of Babe and all, she's wonderful. And she and I were in that episode. And then I just started booking these like TV guest shots, and a bunch of those like ABC TV movies, after school specials. I was, it was like me, Helen Hunt, Jennifer Jason Leigh, um, Meg Tilly when she was young and working as an actress. Um, there's like this whole group of us that were always on those auditions, right? It's a totally different world than it is now. There was no social media. There was no, you know, teenage girls just look like teenage girls, right? Now teenage girls look like they're 27 and they're like super gorgeous and everything is like curated,
Hmm.
But we were just like these gawky kids. Yeah, I did a couple of movies with Helen Hunt, and she and I were friends when we were young like that. And yeah, we were just like these gawky teenagers. We did some movie that was about drug use, and she I remember her character, like she was like the good girl and I was one of the bad girls. And I think she like smoked a joint or she took a hit from a joint, and because it was a cautionary tale, of course, it made her like jump out a third-story window. And for years later, we would laugh about that and say, "Oh, remember that movie where you took a hit of a joint and it made you jump out a window?" Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's a funny career. It's a strange career. It's different now. I mean, a lot of it's the same, but it's different now in terms of there's so much more product for young actors. It was very limited back then. They didn't have anywhere near the kinds of characters and stories and the kinds of things that teenagers could be the stars of back then were very, very limited compared to now. So it's great that young actors and actresses have these tremendous opportunities now. You know.
It's crazy how much has changed,
Oh yeah,
from
it's a
that time to
totally
now.
different industry. It's a totally different industry. And I'll tell you, I'm thrilled. I know people complain. I heard this old man the other day, and I'll be honest with you, he's probably not that much older than I am. But I was in this, I was at my gym, right? And I go to this fabulous gym in Loma Linda. And they had this water aerobics class. And I took it. I thought, oh, I'll take it. And it was mostly like older people. And I went into the class thinking, oh, I work out all the time. I lift weights. It's going to be a piece of cake. It was actually kicked my butt, right? But there was this old man. He was probably 10 or 15 years older than I am, to be honest. He wasn't my age. And he was complaining loudly about the fact that there are so many stations and channels and streamers to watch things on TV. And he wanted to go back to when there were three stations. And I thought, oh, hell, my God. Who would go back to that? Who would go back to that? It was so limited. It was so limited, and there's so much content. There's so many outlets now. So,
There's so many options. There's so many things, you can watch and stuff.
well, no, it never,
Wait,
I don't know how anybody says, I can't think of something to watch. I'm like, there's 9 million things you can watch. There's 9 million things on any given day. And I don't even subscribe to like all the streaming channels. I don't even bother with the like, I don't do Peacock or Paramount Plus, or I don't do Disney anymore now that my son's older because I I did like that you could see National Geographic on the Disney Channel. I did like that part.
mm,
Um, but it's kind of overwhelming, right? I can see in some way why that old man was like freaked out, but at the same time, my God, there's it's so much more interesting. There's so many different ways to tell stories. And streamers will do things that are way outside the box of what traditional TV networks used to do. And still do. I mean, if I see one more like CSI or Law and Order in a different city, I'm gonna lose my mind, right? It's like the same model again and again and again for 20 years. And you're just like, oh, again. So I love the idea that they have all the, like, I love like Netflix and Hulu, and they'll do these like odd, really offbeat, you know, projects, which is great.
Mm. Now, as you mentioned, you attended USC on
Yeah.
scholarship, of course, into
Yeah.
the theater program there. What were the most important things you learned during your time there, and what impact did your time at USC have on your career and moving forward?
I think that had I not gone to USC and had I just started like working, as an actress, I would have been a not very good actress. I wouldn't have been a very versatile actress. I wouldn't have been able to do Shakespeare or period pieces or restoration or um, I did classical theater training, and it was a really good program. It was set up by John Houseman. And by the time I started, John Houseman was gone, but they had brought in this guy named Duncan Ross, who had been the artistic director of Seattle Rep, which was a great theater company. Um, we had great instructors. I mean, we had great instructors. We did speech and diction for 4 years. We did dance for 4 years every single day. We did singing every single day for 4 years. We did dramatic analysis. We had to learn how to break down all these plays, and we had to learn about, and these great playwrights, Ibsen, Strindberg, Shaw, Chekhov. Uh, we performed those plays, and we learned about those plays, and we learned about how those plays were written and the time in which they were written and why those playwrights were so influential at that time. And then we learned the basics of acting, how you build character, how you um, the stuff with diction and movement and everything. You It's like having, your body's like a guitar. I mean, your person is like an instrument, and that's not really like a pretentious thing to say. It really is. And you have to know how to use your voice properly. You have to know how to speak properly. And if you're going to do a period piece, and there's so many movies that are period pieces, you have to know that people did not speak the same way they do now. People did not move their bodies in space the way they do now. Women did not walk in the 1800s the way they do now. Fashion, the constraints of fashion had tremendous constraints on the way women moved. And so you'll see sometimes like an untrained actor, say someone who just started working a lot when they were young and they were lucky, they were successful, but they don't have any real training. And then you'll see them in a period piece and you want to pull your eyes out, right? Because they sound absolutely modern when they speak. They sound like, oh, all right. They have like this like flat modern sound, the placement of their voice. Um, and then the way they move like they're in modern society. And so you have to sort of know all those things, and you learn those things by doing those plays, by doing Shakespeare, by doing restoration, by doing period pieces. Um, for me, I'm very much of a nerd this way. Like I want very much to know like the history of, I love the history of theater. I love how human beings created theater as a way of us reflecting our lives back to us, right? That's the role that we play. And theater played an incredibly important role in ancient Rome and ancient Greece and through history because it was how people helped them to understand their experience of life. You'd see people get up and play out characters that we could identify with, and we'd say, I'm like that. That I would do that. And that's still what we see in movies. That's still what we see in TV shows. It's exactly the same thing. And it's not just entertainment, it has a social function, which is to help us understand our human experience. And and you learn all those things when you do classical theater training, and you learn diction, for God's sake. I hear people, I can't listen to podcasts. I cannot listen to podcasts because some of them have really interesting information. Those podcasters need speech training. They need absolute speech training. It's so jarring the way they speak because they have a lot of them have this unfortunately a lot of them have speak with vocal fry, which is like the worst annoying thing to imagine. And I'll hear, or sometimes I'll watch, I like all these health podcasts. So sometimes you'll hear like a really distinguished physician, young physician, researcher, getting up and talking about some breakthrough in medicine. And they sound like this. When I was in med school and we were studying such and such, this was a major breakthrough. All right. And I don't, they sound stupid. I'm sorry, they sound stupid. They sound stupid. And I know they're not stupid. Obviously, they're not. They're incredibly bright minds. Um, but I guess because I have been through speech training, I'm horrified. There's podcasts I have to turn off because even if I like the content, because I can't stand the sound of their voices, where people speak with these really tight glottal stops. Like, you know who speaks like this? Kamala Harris speaks like this. Kamala Harris speaks with this tightness in her throat that is so off-putting. Like you just want to go, please, if you're the vice president of the United States and if you're in politics, go get speech training. Please, please. Because that sound, nobody just talks that way, right? And you may think you do because you've been doing it for so long, but that's not how anybody's voice is actually placed. That's a sign of some kind of weird tension, or just like there are women, like a lot of Christian women. This is like a big thing in like fundamentalist Christianity, and they talk in these little voices. It's like the Duggars. No, I never watched that show really, but the women all talk like this, and this is part of how you speak to not be threatening. And Mormon fundamentalists speak like this, and I see a couple of these like influencers on like on TikTok who have left fundamentalist Christianity, and they're women and they talk about this. It's called something like Christian baby voice or something. But it's an affectation and it's meant to, and if you've been doing it your whole life, you just think you talk like that, but you don't. And if you go to proper speech training, a lot of times speech training is about breaking down emotional things, right? Breaking down emotional reasons why you present yourself in a certain way. So I know I'm such a blabbermouth. I never shut up. So you keep talking. I'm gonna stop talking.
Well, I'll say this. It definitely sounds like you had a very comprehensive
I did.
education at USC, which is
I
great.
did.
And it
I did.
wasn't sounds like it wasn't just like surface level stuff.
Oh no, no, it was really good. And we had fabulous instructors. We had incredible instructors. Um, and I think the only reason I can do Shakespeare, and I've done a lot of Shakespeare in the last like maybe few years that I wasn't doing a lot of TV. I did a bunch of different like staged readings at LA Shakespeare Center, and a bunch of other things. The only reason I can do those is because I had classical theater training. The only reason I can understand anything about how you speak, how you move, how you is because of that. And I feel like as an actor, you need to do that. Like you need to know those things, you know? You need to know those things. Um, yeah, you do. You just do. And I think as an actor, you also need to know a lot about history. You need to know about literature. You need to know about politics, and you need to know about the context in which things have happened. You have to know about social movements. You have to understand why you know, why communism exploded in Russia and China. You have to understand what social forces led up to that, because that's all of that is the human experience, right? And for us as actors, that's like if you're a painter, that's your paint box, right? That's your paint box. Those are your tubes of paint. Human experience, human emotion, human history. And if you don't know a bunch of that stuff, how do you represent things? You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like you have to know those things. You have to know those things. You have to be well read, for God's sake. Um, and it's amazing how many actors are not. But you have to be, I think, to be a proper actor. I think you have to, because if you don't understand anything about fascism, right? And you get cast in some role in a current movie about something that's happening in our political climate here or in Europe right now, that's going to be the backdrop, right? There's going to be a backdrop because it's not just when you're in something, it's not just your little story. your characters and your storyline. It's what is the backdrop against which that story is set, because that really has an effect on what the historical and backdrop of the history and the social culture that's happening at that time has a huge effect on all of us, you know. I mean, it affects you and me every day. What's happening in the country, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And right out of college, we got to talk about this amazing show that you were on. It's one of my favorite shows that you're
Oh,
on.
I love that show.
College.
I
Right
love
out of
that.
college, Judy Knuckles
I
on Bay
love
City
that
Blues.
show.
Oh,
I
so
love
awesome.
that show. I love that character. I booked that show like 3 weeks out of college. Yeah. And it was considered like the big hot show that year because Steve Bochco had this tremendous success with Hill Street Blues. And that was his show. And you know, he'd been a TV writer for many years. He'd worked on a bunch of big shows. He'd worked on Columbo, you know, he'd worked on all those shows. Um, and this was, you know, his show. It was like the most sought after gig in town, you know. Um, and I booked it. And I remember I was out to lunch with my agent when I got the call, and oh, I was so happy. I was so happy. And I was so disappointed that the show was not a hit because we all really thought it would be, you know, and there were great actors on it. Dennis Franz was on it. Marco Rodriguez was on it. Um, Michael T. Williamson was on it. Ken Olin was on it. Sharon Stone was on it. There were
Mhm.
like a whole bunch of us. And it was a really well written show. It was a really good show. I like that show more than LA Law, to be honest. I really did. Yeah. Yeah. It was fun show to do. Yeah. But short lived, short lived.
Yes, yeah, I know. Unfortunately, short-lived. You know, no, no, I am a huge baseball fan. I love
Oh,
sports.
yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, so I mean, of course, I love it. But I think what makes it a great show is, of course, there's the baseball aspect, which is awesome, but it's really more about the characters
Yeah.
themselves, the
Yeah.
relationships, and that's what makes it such a great show.
Yeah. I mean, all of those, I mean, all of Bochco's shows always had that element. Like there was some, it was set in some setting that was interesting and, you know, appealing, catchy, but it's always about what's going on with those people, what was going on with the people, you know. But yeah, I love that character. God, I love that character. Ugh, I was upset when it ended. Yeah. That was a great show. And so much fun to shoot. Like we shot at this baseball diamond out in like Modesto. So like once a week we'd have to go out on these buses. They'd take us on these big buses and we'd go out to Modesto, which is kind of far actually. It's near Bakersfield, right? And we'd go to Modesto and we'd have to stay there and do like a couple days of shooting at this baseball diamond. It was fun. It was really fun. Yeah.
Is that field still there?
Oh, I'm sure it is. They probably use it for something, you know. I'm sure they use it for Little League or something. You know, I'm sure they do. But yeah, it was fun. It was a fun gig. And I had just gotten out of college, so I was very excited. You know, I was like, what? You know, yeah.
Gosh, I'll have to go visit it sometime. Make sure it's
Yeah.
still there. You
It might
know,
still be there. I'm sure it probably is. Maybe we should look up what baseball field did they use for Bay City Blues. And it'll I'm sure it's there. It was, yeah, it was interesting. It was what a funny time. What a funny time. It was such a long time ago. Yeah. Yeah, I love that show. And I loved all the actors. We had such a good time. I was so young. I didn't really know anything about like life at all. So I was just like wide-eyed, like, wow,
Mm.
you know. Yeah.
Around the time when LA Law was getting ready to happen, I apparently you had read for a role on Matlock at around the same
Yes,
time.
I had. I had read for I had done this I had done one of these movies. The same guys who did Matlock did a whole series. It was a guy named Dean Hargrove, and I forget who his partner was, like Freddie Silverman or something. And they did a whole bunch of these shows, like that sort of Matlock type show. And they had gotten this thing where they were doing TV movies that were with Raymond Burr from Perry Mason when he was young. And now, of course, he was much older. And they did like a series of these TV movies with Perry Mason Returns, right? And I got cast in the young lead in one of those movies. It was before LA Law. Um, it was between Bay City Blues and LA Law. And I played a nun, right? I played a nun who's accused of murder. Of course, I haven't done it, and Barry Mason defends me, and it was very fun, very fun. Um, Raymond Burr was like the nicest man in the world, and a really good gourmet cook. And we would go to his apartment because he had this really nice. We all had like hotel rooms, and he had this really nice apartment in this complex. And he would invite everybody over for dinner, and oh, he was such a good cook. Um, but the producers who did that also did Matlock. So they were developing Matlock at the same time that Stephen Bochco and Terry Louise Fisher were developing LA Law. And I had gone in and read for that, and they offered me the role that Linda Pearl took. And then she left after like a season or two, and I believe it was the heck, I know that actress. Her name is Nancy something. She took over that role, but they had offered me that role. They had offered me the daughter role, who was the second lead on that show, and to work with Andy Griffith. Oh my God. I loved Andy Griffith from the Andy Griffith Show. And I loved Andy Griffith from that fabulous movie he did before the Andy Griffith Show called The Face in the Crowd, where he is like the scariest guy on earth, right? Um, but the LA Law situation happened at the same time, literally the same week. And Steve Bochco had written that role for me. I never read for it or anything. And I didn't know he was going to do that, but he called me up and he said, listen, there's a role for this young lawyer in this, and do you want to do it? Because he knew me from Bay City Blues. And I said, yes. And LA Law was such a hot show, you know what I mean? It was like everybody was all over it. And so I chose LA Law instead of Matlock, you know. But there are some times I do wish, like, God, I would have been able to work with Andy Griffith, you know. Who doesn't love Andy Griffith? Um, but I'm happy I chose LA Law. I'm happy I chose LA Law. But yeah, it was the same week. I remember it was the same week. And then suddenly I had to make a decision and I was like, oh, you know. And I would have made more money on Matlock, that's for damn sure. But LA Law was like the show that year, so you kind of wanted to be on that one, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What do you think it would have been like if you had chosen Matlock instead?
Um, it would have been different. I would have been the female lead, right? I would have been the female lead, and I wouldn't have been a supporting character. I would have looked a lot better on camera because as Abby Perkins, they made me look as like dowdy and frumpy as a person could look, which was part of the character, but that was like a hurdle to get over once I was off that show. I had all these people. When I finished LA Law, I was 30 years old. When I left after 5 seasons, I was 30 years old. And in person, I looked like I was like, 25. And I had all these people in casting who thought I was in my 40s because all the other actresses on that show were a good 10 to 15 years older than I was. And they had always made me look kind of, I looked fine, but it was that thing with the suits and the big hair and everything. And um, they never made you look like, if you're the female lead of a show, they're going to make you look good, right? They're going to give you great makeup. They're going to give you great everything. So I would have, I would have made more money. I would have just in terms of my physical person, I would have looked much better. Um, I would have probably made a lot more money in residuals, because Matlock ran forever and LA Law never did because of something that Stephen Bochco did with the deal for the show, kept it from ever going into syndicated television. Um, so I don't know. I mean, honestly, there are moments when I think maybe I should have taken Matlock, just in terms of careers, because it would have also set me up to do more of those kind of TV movies that I did after LA Law. You know what I mean? It would have set me up more to be in those kind of, female lead, women in jeopardy movies. I did a number of them, but and I probably would have done another series a lot. Uh, and I would have been probably considered for the female lead in another series. Um, but coming off of LA Law, it was a tremendous hurdle. Like I had all these casting people. I remember there was a role on something, the character was 32 years old and I was 30, and my agent couldn't even get me in on it because they were sure I was 44 or something, you know. And I have to say, I am one of those people, unfortunately, who had like the worst representation over the years. And I was not at like little rinky dink agencies. I was at big agencies that have a really good reputation. I happen to have like the worst agents you can imagine, like so lazy, like I remember this agent said to me, I said, I don't want to go in for these characters in their early 40s, right? Because I'm 30. And when I walk in the room, there's always this moment when they go, oh, and I never booked those jobs. So they're not going to cast me as the 40 something year woman who's the mother of the 20 something year old when I'm 30, right? And I had this agent who said to me, and she was at a big agency, and she said, but that's how old they think you are, and that's the easy audition to get. And you're like, it doesn't matter. Okay, getting me the audition is not the point. The point is getting me an audition that I'm actually going to book, right? And I've talked with a number of actors over the years, and they always say to me, "Boy, you had the worst experience." And very good agencies. I'm not sure, not going to say who they are, but horrible agents. I had horrible agents, lazy. Oh, yeah. It was very frustrating. I was a very unhappy in my post LA law years. I was the first few years I was fine, but I was really frustrated after that because I knew I had this plan for what I wanted to do, and I couldn't get any of these people I was working with on board. Managers as well. Like you go, aren't you supposed to be doing the more specialized stuff? And no, it was very frustrating.
You know, those TV movies you did. I mean, literally, you're the standout in all of those movies
Oh,
that
thank you.
clearly and and seriously, some of those are really good, really fun watches. Let's see, there's one that you did with John Ratzenberger and
Oh
William
yeah, yeah,
That
yeah,
one's a really fun one.
yeah.
Uh,
No, I worked with a lot of really fun actors. I had a good time doing those movies. They were fun. They were super. We shoot most of them in Canada, you know. I have a lot of friends in Canada as a result of that. Um, they were fun. They were fun gigs, but I kind of wanted, like, I really wanted to do indie films. I wanted to do kind of like really interesting, kind of offbeat characters. And I was coming off of this huge series, and it wouldn't have been hard to do that. You know what I mean? I was coming off of this show that had been winning Emmys for years and years, and I just had these agents who simply they wouldn't do it. I had this one agent at a very big agency who said to me after a couple of years of like literally sending me out for nothing, having come off a huge show. And he said, well, I'm just not really sending you out for stuff because you want to do stuff that I just think you should do another series. And he kept wanting me to send me in to play like the really frumpy, dowdy woman who can't get a date. And I was 30 years old, and you want to go, okay, look, I'm not Angelina Jolie, but I'm a pretty girl. You know what I mean? Why am I going to play the girl who can't get a date? Like, what? Huh? And I don't think that's just my big ego. I think it's like, what? You know, and, but that was easy, right? That was easy. And it was just the easy thing. And there were all these people who thought I was older and thought I was all these things. And he said to me one day, well, I just figure at some point you're going to run out of money and you're going to have to take whatever I send you on. Right. And he is the head right now of one of the biggest agencies in LA. And at that point, he was just branching out to that. And I remember us sitting in his office and I said, that's your plan? That is your business plan for me in my career. To have me play like the homely, unattractive woman who can't get a date on a bad sitcom. And to not send me out for the stuff I've been asking you to please submit me for. Because you think I'm going to just run out of money at some point. Yeah. And the guy thought he was like my best friend. I mean, I was like, whoa. Yeah. I see him every now and then at things, and he's like smarmy, and he's always like, oh, and I always want to go, you're one of the worst agents I ever had. I don't care how big your agency is, I
yeah.
don't care how big you are. You're a jerk. But so yeah, yeah, I had a vision, and I started writing, doing a lot of writing. I started writing pilots and screenplays when I was about 30, 31. And back then, man, you couldn't get anybody to take you seriously if you were an actress. If you had written something, they would look at you like you're crazy because actresses didn't write.
Just to touch back on LA Law for a second, I've heard you say that you don't think that Abby really evolved that much throughout the course of the show. I'm curious if you were writing for the show back then, right, and you had complete control over where Abby would go, how would you have her grow and evolve, and like
Well,
what direction would you take her?
I would have had she was the only character on the show who had kids, right? I mean, I guess like the Douglas Brackman character had kids, and Richard Dysart's character probably had like grown kids or something, you know. But the Ann Kelsey Stuart Markowitz couple didn't have kids. Jimmy Smith's character didn't have kids. Harry and Susan didn't have kids. Arnie Becker didn't have kids. I was the only character that had a child. I was the only single parent. I felt like there's so many things you can do about how hard it is to be a single parent, a woman in a really demanding career as a young lawyer where you have to put in these crazy hours and you have to. And they had set it up that I had this alcoholic ex-husband. That could have been a really rich thing to explore. You know what I mean? Um, and just the whole thing of being a young person, not an established lawyer who's a partner in a law firm, but a young person trying hard to like get their foot in. Or there could have been more stuff with me and Blair, about the competition between young attorneys in those big firms. I just felt like there were all these things you could have explored about her life. But the problem was Abby Perkins had a life that was completely different than any of the writers on the show. We had no women writers. They were all men. Those guys all had wives who were like stay-at-home wives, and they had nannies and they had housekeepers. They hadn't had to worry about picking their kids up from school or getting their kids to a doctor's appointment. They had never had to think about that once in their lives. You know what I mean? None of them had any clue of what it is to be like a 25-year-old woman with a child with a really demanding career, especially back then, because it was a different time. You see, there's more things that deal with that now. But I felt like, God, you could have explored all these things about her life. And I was just sort of, even, initially she was like the one who always, she was always fumbling. She was always doing things wrong. She was always ending up with egg on her face. And eventually they let Abby have her own little law firm for a while, and she came back. Um, that was an interesting season for me because they actually had something happen where she did something. Because for the first 3 years, probably, I just would say, we're doing depositions tomorrow. You know what I mean? It was like it. I'd be in those conference room scenes, and I was always there to sort of, you know, be in the background of stuff. But there was not a lot of really interesting stuff. And I just felt like as the youngest female character and as the only parent, there was just stuff they could have dealt with that had to do with what is that life.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that's kind of the interesting thing is that I mean you're freaking fantastic on the show.
Thank
You're
you.
creating great performance after great performance. Yet I still don't think that we even came close to seeing the full potential of Abby as
Well,
a character.
she could have been a character who really went from being this kind of nervous Nellie to being much more self-possessed and being much more. And they just had no clue. I mean, they literally had no clue. They would just like plug me into things like, oh, let's have Abby show up at the office today with a great big dog that she found. And you know why they did that? Because I'm like an animal person. And I myself was always like showing up with like a dog in my car that I found on the way to the studio. Like I'd be on my way to Fox and I would see like some dog on Santa Monica Boulevard and I'd stop and I'd show up at work and I'd have this mangy dog that I was going to rescue or something. And they would go, what does Michele have a dog with her? Like I found this dog. So, oh, let's have Abby show up with a dog. And you want to go, I'm sorry, you're writers. Couldn't you come up with something that's different than what happened to me last week? I don't know. I don't know. Because I feel like with the Abby character, they never really thought about what her life was like. They just kind of plugged her in. And then there's this weird episode where Jimmy Smits and I have a conversation in Spanish because I'm bilingual. Abby Perkins isn't supposed to be bilingual. She's supposed to be from like Ohio. She's like this like nice white girl from Ohio. But let's just have Abby speak Spanish because Michele speaks Spanish. So you know what I mean? It's like this weird, like, we don't really have a well-defined character. We're just gonna like plug in stuff that we know about Michele. Yeah. I was like, why am I speaking Spanish? Huh? Oh, because you speak Spanish? Well, yeah, I know I do. Why does Abby speak Spanish? No answer, no explanation, right?
Mm.
Nobody thought about that. So in that regard, I just feel like they didn't quite know what to do with her, you know? So what do you do?
Yeah,
And I also don't feel, I don't feel that that was a writing team that really, I don't think they wrote well for women. You know, I don't think they did. Even for the other characters on the show. And I think all of us kind of felt that, all the women. Because there were no female writers, you know, there was Carrie Louise Fisher invented the show, right? She wrote the show and then she got pushed out, right? She got very much pushed out of her own show, which was like a political move. And we were all sort of horrified that happened after the first season. The women, we were all horrified. Susan and Jill and I, we all looked at each other like, oh, guess we're on our own now because we don't have any female writers. And then late in the show, they brought in Pat Green for like a season or something, but that was like an old boys club. And it was all these guys, all the same type of guy, you know. Um, I always say they're like those guys that sit in an office with like a Nerf basketball hoop on the door, and they like sit in their chairs, rocking back and forth and shoot the Nerf basketball. They're all like that kind of guy, you know what I mean? And they didn't, you know, they didn't write anything for women, for God's sake, you know. So it was okay though. Look, it was a great show in many ways, so it's not something that I regret. But I always felt sort of like poor Abby. She could have done so much more.
around the time of the LA Law Reunion movie that came out in 2002,
So awful. It was so awful.
you know,
Oh, oh no.
so around that time, I read that you and other cast members appeared on The Weakest Link.
Oh, we did, and they totally sabotaged me. They
R
did.
really? So what happened? Because I couldn't
I
find
don't
it
know.
online, so I don't even know what
No,
happened.
they asked me some question. I don't know. I was totally not, I didn't even know what that show was. I'd never seen it. I was like, oh, we're doing this. And, oh, but they got rid of me right away. They got rid of me right away. I didn't even understand the format of the show. I wasn't good on it at all. I was just like, I remember I gave like a crazy answer to something that I had no idea what it was. So no, they didn't really sabotage me. I probably sabotaged myself, but I was on it quickly and I was gone. I was gone. I was eliminated right away.
Oh,
But that
oh
was okay because
man.
I was kind of embarrassed by the whole thing. You know what I mean? And I remember saying to someone, I hope I get eliminated right away because I really felt uncomfortable. You know, felt cheesy. You know what I mean? I
Mm.
felt really cheesy being on it. So I didn't want to be out there a lot. I wanted to sort of come and go quickly, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, at least the good thing is that you're in there, then you're out of there. So it was quick.
In and out very quick. Yeah.
Um, I want to talk about a super awesome project you got to be a part of just a couple years ago in 2020, as part of the Viral Vignettes fundraiser.
Oh, it's so
Actors.
fun with David Levin. Yes, it was
Yes.
wonderful. It was really fun, really fun. We were just everybody's heads was spinning. You know, the pandemic had hit and nobody knew what was going on, right? We were just everybody was like, I mean, I wasn't I was already living in the mountains and I wasn't working all the time. I had stepped back from working in TV for a few years because I just, you know, it was too hard with my son being so little and my mom's health was really poor and I was in this like sandwich. Um, and I just didn't, you know, the way the requirements of my family life were, I couldn't be a person who got a job and, oh, I leave tomorrow to go to Canada for a week, or, oh, I booked a job and I start tomorrow at 5 a.m. and I'm going to be there for 18 hours. Um, you know, I'm a single parent. I didn't have another person, another adult in the house that could help manage all these things. And my mom was living with us at the time and she was in, you know, she was in a serious health decline. So so when the pandemic hit, my life was already kind of quiet, right? Um, so because I wasn't really social, I wasn't involved in a bunch of work stuff. But nonetheless, there was just that sense of just existential dread, right? Like, what the hell is this virus? All these people are dying, you know, what is going on? And we were all so isolated, you know. Um, so when David reached out to me and to a bunch of other actors, all of whom were wonderful, you know. I mean, Jane Kasmerick is so funny in her episode. You know, we were thrilled. Everybody was thrilled to do it. We were like, yeah, something to do, you know. So yeah, it was really fun. And David's done so much with it. He's entered it in so many festivals and it's done really well. And no, it was great. It was great. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 for sure. I gotta ask, what was it like getting to work with Renee Taylor on that?
Oh, it was fun. I mean, she was such an icon, you know what I mean? She was such a legend. She was great. She was really funny and it was great. I enjoyed it tremendously. We did it all like, we were all in our houses, right? And David would just record it like this, like a Zoom. And I thought, the dialogue was so funny. The idea that she just, didn't understand that we were not coming, that nobody was coming for Passover. Um, yeah, I enjoyed it. She was so funny. She was really funny and so nice, I mean, she was great. Yeah, it was great. It was, and I watched all the other ones, of course. I love Susan Rutan's with that where she's like the public health worker or something, and she's got that weird guy, that funny actor who's in his like garage. Oh, it was so funny. Yeah, Jane Kasmerick is hysterical in hers, so yeah, I had fun. And David Levin is like the nicest man in the world. He's so nice, he's so creative, he's great. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that overall, it was a very tough time, but I think what's interesting is that during the pandemic, at times it sort of brought out some cool and creative things, and
Oh, it did. It did. It did. I mean, you had to work, and I have friends who have like acting studios in LA, really, good friends of mine. And they did their entire classes on Zoom and everything. And it brings out a totally different, even to do an acting class or anything on Zoom is a really different and kind of interesting. And even to do the viral vignettes. I mean, you're doing this performance that's on a tiny screen, you know. It's a really interesting. I think it brought out a lot of creative. I do. I think a lot of creative people had to adjust in ways that sort of push them into new areas.
mm,
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, the pandemic wasn't fun, but
yeah, 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 it was not, but
yeah,
but at least there was some good things that came out of it.
yeah, yeah. So weird. I think back, like, how weird was that? Like, everything stopped. I mean, it was so weird,
Yeah, I
so
know,
incredibly
right?
weird, you know? Like, my son is a craniofacial patient at Children's Hospital, right? Because he was born with a cleft lip and a cleft palate. So he's had a bunch of surgeries and stuff. And everything stopped. He had just started orthodontia, and you're supposed to go every 6 weeks. And orthodontia for cleft palate is very different than normal orthodontia because, you know, when your mouth didn't form properly and your bone went backwards instead of across, you have teeth in really weird places. So they just, I mean, we didn't see them for a year. It was the weirdest thing. We didn't see any of those doctors for a year. So strange, really strange. Yeah.
Keeping with the pandemic theme here, you worked on a fantastic, amazing short film called
Oh, the kill
Go
floor.
For It.
I love that movie. Um, I love the director. I thought it was wonderful. I thought the script was great. I loved it. And I felt really bad because all the PR for that, I was really had a really hard time participating in because I live in this ridiculous town. We did it in the fall. And so a lot of the PR and the festivals and everything, because it won a bunch of awards and a lot of festivals, was all that following spring. And I live in an area that was hit with these like absolutely insane, like FEMA disaster storms, right? Because where I live, I'm in Southern California, right? So we normally get maybe a couple feet of snow in the entire season. And we got 10 feet in 2 days. And the entire area was shut down. The roads up and down to civilization were closed. People couldn't get out of their homes. Homes were exploding. I think 15 people died because of this storm. Um, and right when they were having all kinds of like festivals and press panels and discussions with the actors and the director, I couldn't get to any of that. I couldn't get to any of it. And I remember having to miss a couple of things in San Diego, and I was so disappointed. And then in the aftermath of that, I had all this damage at my house, and it was so hard to get it fixed because this is a small town, and these contractors would be like, "Oh yeah, I can get you in 6 months." No, I don't want you to get here in 6 months. So trying to get the work done, having to oversee the work, having to be home every day while these guys came in and out of my house. And I'm the only adult. It's not like I can leave my son home and say, manage all these workers, right? So it just ate up my whole 2023. It was like completely ruined by these storms. They ruined my life. Yeah. I hated 2023 because of that. Yeah. And I missed out on so many things with that movie. It was really upsetting to me. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. What did it mean to you to kind of help tell, such an important story like that?
Oh, I loved it. I just thought, so many people that were essential workers, right? In these industries, like you were hearing about it at Amazon workers, like they didn't want to give them PPO. They didn't want to give them, they didn't want to give them masks. They didn't want to give them things to protect them, you know, in these closed environments where that stuff was just, COVID was just running rampant. And, what happens in that film, those are all Mexican immigrants, right? And those were all workers in one of those like company towns. It's run by a thing like Tyson or any of the big meat companies, and they control the entire town. They control the economy of the town. And the idea that workers and Latino workers or Asian workers or um, are somehow deemed like, oh, we don't have to really protect them. They're not as valuable. They're just here on the front line. We just need them to get the work done. We don't want to pay the expense of the idea that like a big corporate meat packing plant would not pay to protect their workers with proper gear. You know what I mean? It's if I really like that part of the story, that it really exposed, the way so many, low income essential workers, essential people in our economy, who if they don't, like if farm workers don't show up and pick those crops, you have no lettuce. You know what I mean? The idea that there's this disconnect, that labor, that people who labor in these kinds of jobs are just deemed expendable, you know, to the companies that run them, to the bigger conglomerates that run them. So I really enjoyed that part of the story. I thought it was really interesting and a very interesting take on that segment of Latino population, because Latino workers are overwhelmingly the workers in every Tyson chicken plant all over the country. Um, all these meat packing plants, they're all immigrant workers, Latinos and people from other countries as well, but they're all low wage, low income immigrant workers. And they take those jobs that other people don't want, Other people don't want that backbreaking work. They don't want to be there at 5 a.m., dealing with chicken carcasses or whatever. But so many of those people that are really essential are just treated like they don't matter. They're of no value. And I really liked that aspect of the story. And the fact that I played this like horrible mouthpiece of one of those companies.
Mm.
I really like that, I like she was such an awful woman, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I want to commend you on your performance. I mean, it's fantastic, and you do a great job of making your character extremely unlikable.
Yeah, she's
So,
such an unlikable woman. She's just like party line, party line. We just, I look at people in politics. I look at people in all kinds of things, and I think, how do you get up and say that? Like, how do you get up and say that? How do you stand in front of people and say that? How do you stand in front of reporters and say those words? Because you know damn well that that's not the truth, right?
mm,
Well, she's a horrible woman. She was awful. But I like those kind of, now that I'm older, I like the idea of playing those sort of awful villain women. I love that, I love that. Maybe that's what the next phase of my career will be.
yeah, yeah. We'll all say this. You're very good at it. So.
The evil, evil, mean, awful older woman. Yeah. Yeah. It'd be fun to play. I'd love to play those characters, actually. I would love to. Waited my whole life to play those characters.
Yeah, another thing, I know you're a part of is the Adelante Arts
Yeah.
Collective,
Yeah.
performing and language arts program. You're the artistic director for.
Yeah.
What's the story about that and how it came to be?
I just wanted to put that program together. I'd started with the ideas for it when I sold my first book. And my first novel has a Latina protagonist, right? She's like a dreamer. She's born in Mexico and brought to the US as a baby. Um, lives in Echo Park, and it's a fun, it's like a mystery, but sort of a urban mystery kind of thing. But the main character is this really, really bright, smart, girl who wants to be an archaeologist and who wants to be a scientist, and great straight A student and everything, living in Echo Park. And um, but I would go and do visits with schools, right? I would go and talk to schools because there's obviously a lot of Latino students in high schools in California, and a lot of kids were like really liked the book because they felt like they liked seeing this character that was like them, because a lot of the way Latinos are depicted in media is really narrow and often really stereotypical. You're a gang member, you're a drug dealer, you're, you know, you're not you're not always the most positive character, right? And I got invited to a lot of schools, and a lot of English teachers invited me to talk to their students and talk about writing. And that kind of morphed into doing some writing programs in I did one in Echo Park and at El Centro del Pueblo, and working with kids living in these like sort of gang impacted neighborhoods. And some of those kids wrote great stuff. And a lot of them were kids who had not done well in school. They didn't think that they could write. They didn't think that they could do anything like that. And then I started doing like theater classes. I started doing acting classes with all kinds of people. And even when I first moved up here, this is a very small town. It's like an underserved community. So I started doing acting classes up here and with adults, with teenagers. It was really fun and I really enjoyed it. And um, so then I just thought, what am I gonna call it? I'm gonna call it Adelante Arts Collective. And that's what it is. I haven't done a lot with it in the last few years because I've been super busy, and I because now my son can drive. I have been like the chauffeur because he doesn't go to school up here. He goes to school down the hill. So it's a 45-minute to an hour drive each way. And I would drive him to school, and then I would end up spending the whole day down the hill, and I would just go to the library and write. But it was hard to set up workshops with me having to be the shuttle service, right? And the small town that I live in doesn't really have a full-time community that's big enough to support that kind of program. So I really needed to do it down in Redlands or Riverside or San Bernardino. But my schedule with driving was quite demanding. But now my son can drive. So I'm going to start setting them up again, like in the fall. And I really enjoy it. And I like people who don't even want to be actors. I mean, I had this acting class with people like one guy was a pastor, one woman was a realtor, one woman was a retired firefighter, and they'd never really done any kind of acting. And they really enjoyed it. We did a couple of productions and stuff, and it was a lot of fun. And I like to see the way it's amazing how people of all walks of life take to that when they're in an environment that says, yeah, you can just do anything you want. You can make up any kind of character. You can do these crazy improvs. It's so freeing for people, you know what I mean? The idea that you're not yourself and you can kind of get up and make a fool of yourself or it's a very, very freeing thing. I want to do a program with doctors in hospitals. I really want to do that program with doctors, and a writing program as well with doctors and hospital healthcare workers. Because I feel like those people are dealing with such literal life and death situations all the time. They're all highly educated. They've all been on these tracks that are like, I'm on the career path. And I think it would be really like a stress release, you know, for them to take part in something where it was just like creatively free flow, make up anything you want. There's no wrong, nothing's wrong, right? There's no wrong way to do it. So I like the idea of taking like acting and writing programs to people who aren't necessarily doing that. You know what I mean? That's not like their career path or anything, but to take it to people who think that it's very alien from what they do, to find out that it's really not. You know, that's what I like. Yeah.
What do you find most rewarding about your work with the program?
Oh, I like to see, because like if you're doing an acting program, even a writing program, but if you're doing an acting program, especially, you can't help it. People discover things about themselves, right? They discover things about themselves. A lot of times, once I start a class, I sort of get a sense of people, and I'll say, do this scene, because I know it's a scene that's going to push them into an area that maybe they don't want to go. You know what I mean? Maybe they don't want to. I did a play up here. I did a version of that play, Talking With, which is a collection of monologues. It came out in the 80s. It was a great, great play. I did it up here in a little theater we had up here. It's all women. And one of the women who was in this little program, a really beautiful woman, she was like about 70, and she really had a problem with aging, right? She really had a problem with aging. And she was like she was always like perfectly made up, beautifully dressed, always, always. When you just knew by talking to her and getting to know her. So I had her do this monologue that was about that. And it was about a woman who has like a bunch of different lights in her house, and she turns on different lights, and different lights make her feel different ways because of how they reflect on her. And she was really uncomfortable at first because she said, I don't want to do this monologue. And I was like, well, why don't you want to do it? And she said, because I just feel like it's making me like think about things. And after we rehearsed for a while, she was so good in it. And by the end, she said, God, this felt good. This felt like I was able to go into this place and look at this part of myself. That's what I find most rewarding, because that's what acting does for you. Acting does that for you. And if you do a program and it's not just about being funny or entertaining, and you do a program where you actually get to know your students and you push them into the things that are going to force them to see, unlock things in themselves. Because it feels good. Any of those locked rooms feel so good when you open them, you know? And we all have them. We all have them. But you have moments where you just let it out, and it's great. It's great. It's great. So that's what I like. I find that really rewarding.
Mm.
Because I love the idea of taking this art form and having it help free people up just in their personal life, humanity. You know what I mean?
Mm.
That's much more appealing to me than like coaching someone for an audition. You know what I mean? Like somebody who wants to be an actor, I'm like, yeah, 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 go. Other people do that, but I like to do this other stuff, you know?
Now, as we've been talking about here, you've done so many incredible things in your life, and definitely one of those is being a parent. You
Yeah,
adopted your son when he was 2, and you scaled back on acting to make sure that
yeah,
you were there for him.
yeah.
What's that journey been like for you raising your son, seeing him grow up?
My son is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I mean, my son is, I would say my son made me a much better actress. He made me a much better writer. He made me a better person, you know, because when you, and I know it's different. I know that when you have a child and you give birth to a child, you have all these like chemical things that happen, you know, that bond you to the child. That's part of the species. But honestly, when you are ready to bring a child into your life, and like I chose my son from like a photo on a website, right? And I knew the minute I saw his photo, I was like, it was like something flipped a switch in me, and I'm like, that's him, that's the one, I want him. And it's like everything that you think you know about life changes. Everything that you think you know what it is to love something deeply. You think you know what it is to really care about something. You think you know what it is to risk everything, you know. And when you have a child, boy, it's like you realize you knew nothing. You did not know. You did not know at all. And that's why I say it makes you a better actor, it makes you a better artist. If you're an artist, it deepens your art because you suddenly have this understanding of a depth of feeling that you didn't have before, that you didn't have. And my son is the greatest. I mean, I hit the jackpot, man. You never know whether it's your biological child or an adopted child. You don't know. You have no idea because they're not an extension of you. They're like their separate being. They have their own path. They have their own journey. They have their own trajectory. You get the privilege of raising them to adulthood. If you do it well, then they want to see you when they're adults, when they're no longer dependent upon you. If you do it badly, they don't want to see you when they're not dependent upon you. So all these parents who are like, my kids don't talk to me anymore. You want to go, what'd you do wrong? Because if your children want to be around you when they're adults and they enjoy your company, you did your job well, you know. But they're not just an extension of your ego. They're not just an extension of your dreams or your frustrations or the things you didn't accomplish. And I see parents who put those things on their kids, and you're like, my God, it's their life. It's their life. And I think that when you adopt a child, maybe you have a clearer sense of that because you have taken this child from someplace else. But adoption itself is traumatic. It's traumatic for children, and people tend to think of like, there's like people think of adopting parents as like these like saviors, like, oh, you saved this child. It's really not like that. It's not like that. Um, I always say people in front of my son, people, clumsy, stupid people would say, he's so lucky. And I would correct them and I would say, no, 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 I am the lucky one. I am the lucky one because I have the privilege of raising him. But the idea that like adoptees are supposed to be so grateful, they had no choice in the matter. They were babies. Um, and it's the greatest thing in the world. I mean, I love my son. I said, I'd fight a bear for my son. I really, literally, literally. If someone said to me like, okay, I'm either going to push you off this cliff or your son, I'd say, give me the push. I mean, it wouldn't be a question. You wouldn't even think about it. Um, he's the greatest. He's the greatest. He's the greatest person. I every single day. I'm happy that I took that time away from work. It was frustrating professionally, financially, it was difficult. Um, it was hard to be out of like my creative life, really. The harder part of that actually was taking care of stuff with my mom, because my mom was elderly and had a lot of health problems, and my mother had a lot of mental health issues as well. Um, but I'm so grateful. Even if I say, okay, I didn't work very much, I didn't make that much money. I had moments where I was like really up against the wall financially, and I'm like, what am I going to do? Um, but I wouldn't trade that at all. I wouldn't trade those years of just being home every day and picking him up from school and oh, and please, it's not like it's a cakewalk. It's really frustrating. Sometimes you want to pull your hair out. But I was lucky enough to have a great kid. My son came with people say to me in front of him, oh, you've done such a great job raising him. And I'm like, no, thank you. He came with great raw material. I was lucky, man. I hit the effing jackpot. I did. He's the greatest kid. He's smart, he's funny, he's kind, he's so considerate, he's so astute, he's got tremendous perspective. He's great. I remember when he was in kindergarten, his teacher said to me, he is the kindest boy in the class. It made me so proud to hear them say that, because I feel like that's what you want to be. You want to be the kindest one. You want to be the kindest one. And he's wonderful. I'm getting too emotional now, Sam. I love my son so much I could die. He's so great. He's so fabulous. He's so funny. He's so smart. I'm so looking forward. He's going to be an engineer. He's going to go to college. He said to me last year, he said, Mom, I want to live at home my first year of college because I don't think I'm mature enough to live in a dorm with other kids. I said, okay. He said, and I'm an only child and I'm used to my privacy and whatnot. And I always say to him, I'm really clear about wanting him, like, it's his life. It's his life. I don't ever want him to feel that he has to do things a certain way, that my approval is conditional, or that my love for him is conditional in some way. Anything he did, I'd be completely behind. Oh, he's so good. He's so great. I love my son so much. Best thing I ever did. Best thing I ever did. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well, that's truly fantastic. Truly,
yeah.
truly,
It's
and
just,
like it's really really powerful to hear about that.
he's just a wonderful boy. And, people say to me, I always say to him, like, people say to me, oh, and then he'll be able to take care of you when you're old. I'm like, I don't want him to do that. I'm an old mother. I mean, I became a mother late in life, and I don't want my son to be a young man having to like, God, worry about me. I'd cut off my head, before I'd see that. So and he's always like, why do you go to the gym every day, Mom? I said, because I'm going to be in really good shape until the day I like either get hit by a bus or just drop dead. I'm not going to be that person that you have to be worrying about my care or what are we going to do with her, you know? Like I don't want to be that person, you know. I don't want that. I don't want that, so yeah. So yeah. So I feel like, you know, I'll be super fit, I'll be super healthy, and then maybe one day I'll just like have an aneurysm and die and it'll be nice and easy, you know.
Now, this is the last question that I always ask at the end of these
Okay.
interviews. What is the biggest piece of advice that you would give to an aspiring actor?
Okay. I would, to an inspiring actor, I would say a couple things. We live in a world now with social media and the internet where you can create a lot of your own opportunities. You can you can have a YouTube channel. You can not just in terms of promoting your identity or your name, there's any number of things you could do on social media, on the internet. You could put together a little theater group. You could put together any number of things. And then you could do like David Levin did with viral vignettes, right? You could any number of things you could do and you could get it out there and you could promote it and you could get attention for yourself. I would say utilize all of those things. And most young people are very adept at that, Utilize every possible thing you can do in terms of the internet, social media outreach to get your name, your face, your work. Figure out what how you want to sell yourself, right? How you want to sell yourself. You want to know what do are you a writer? Are you an actress? Are you a performer? Are you a singer? Um, Figure out what your strong suit is, what you love to do, come up with that persona, and then do everything you can in terms of the internet and social media and everything to promote that and put that out there. And then I would say, do not buy into like the fear based attitude of the industry because the industry runs on fear, runs on fear. You have to take every job they give you. You have to put up with things or do things that you don't want to do. And that can be a lot of things to get opportunities. Um, Producers are afraid. They're afraid they're going to pick the wrong project and it's going to be a failure. Casting directors are afraid they're not going to find the right actor. And they want you as an actor, they want you to be afraid. They want you to feel like you have to say yes to everything. You don't have to say yes to everything. Plot your course. Figure out exactly what type of actor you want to be, what types of projects you want to be. Pursue those projects. Um, and do everything you can to raise your profile, to build a following for you on your own, and don't rely on just things that happen in the industry to come to you, because there's a lot of weird things you have no control over. And the internet gives you tremendous power in terms of marketing yourself, getting yourself out there, presenting yourself the way you want to be seen. You know what I mean? You're not just at the mercy of how they see you. And I would say, make sure you exercise regularly for your mental health. I'd say make sure you have a small circle of good friends who aren't necessarily in the industry. Maybe have regular lives, right? Keep you sort of grounded so you don't feel pretty soon you get swallowed up in that world. Get a pet. Those are the things I would say. Get a pet, exercise, but do as much as you can because it's such an amazing world now, Young people can do so much, anybody, any old people, you can do so much to put what you want to put out there online. There's tons of outlets. Yeah. So that's what I would do.
Well, that is some amazing, amazing advice, Michelle. And there's not much more I can say
Oh, this has been fun,
other than thank you
What else I
so
would say?
much.
The other thing I would say is start writing, start writing, start
Mhm.
writing. Write and start to create product for yourself. Start to write stuff for yourself. Create stories, create scripts, create characters that you want to play. I mean, like Billy Bob Thornton was playing like these sort of crappy supporting roles and things. and he was doing something on some show, and he sat in his dressing room and he made that face and he did that voice in the mirror. That was the character from Sling Blade. He said he was looking in a mirror and he went like, wow, whatever, how he did that character of Carl. And from that idea, that character, came the idea for that film, came the idea for that story, which radically changed his career, right? Radically changed his career. Right, right. Come up with characters, come up with stories. Create the stuff you want, right? That's what I would say. So now my hair is dried in the course of this. I have no idea what it looks like because I can't see myself. But no, no, it's so great talking to you. Thank you for reaching out to me.